My name is Sony. I'll present a technical summary of the second day of Robot in 3 days. The day began with an analysis of what was coming out of the robots in 3 days within the community. We also did a recap of what we had done in the previous day, the prototypes, what worked and what didn't. During the brainstorming session with the engineering team, we realized that very little data was being collected about intaking the coral off the ground. Most of the data was about intaking from the human player, so we decided to focus today on picking up the piece from the ground, trying to do it as efficiently as possible and in various formats, to gather as much information as possible in this process. We also concluded that the algae prototypes we made on the first day were sufficient to gather good data. Since it's not such a complex piece, we could spend more time on the other parts and also focus on finalizing things. So, from the morning until about 3 p.m., we worked on prototypes to pick up the coral from the ground and also finalize the reef. After that, we started testing interactions between the intake and outtake system for the coral with the reef. We ran a few tests shooting the piece. We realized it is possible, but depends a lot on the height and distance from where we kick the coral in the relation to the reef. The angle, force, and speed of the motor also come into play. Although it's feasible, it's also risky because the piece needs to be perfectly centered in the outtake system to work 100%. We tested it several times, but the precision wasn't quite there yet. We're now working to improve the system to make it more efficient, but it's still a challenge. One of the tests we ran was trying to hit the ball behind the reef to remove the algae that was there with the coral. It worked, but we believe it's really hard, as there are many physical barriers that make it difficult to effectively execute the shoot to remove the piece. Still, it was an interesting attempt. We think we need to test everything and share as much content as possible. So this is a possibility, but unfortunately, it wasn't as effective as we hoped. In the afternoon, we resumed the brainstorming session to align with the team on what would be done in the late afternoon and evening. We agreed to start creating more accurate prototypes for the final robot, focusing on the chassis. The drivetrain interaction was assigned to a few tasks, and we began building the final prototype of the algae to pick up directly from the ground. We also decided to remove the algae from the reef using the corals intake system. And we also decided that we would pick up the coral from the ground, both horizontally and vertically, to make it easier to place in the reef and score points without involving the human player directly. To summarize, we completed all the intake and outtake tests for both pieces. Now, at the end of the night and going into the early morning of the third day, we're working on finalizing an elevator or arm to raise the intake and more easily place the pieces in the reef. The issue of the climb is also a challenge. It's been difficult to develop a system that is simple enough to execute by the end of Robot in 3 days. We're also finishing the structure of the field, the cage, which is being completed now during the night.